What if I told you the internet wasn't invented in Silicon Valley, wasn't born out of a desire to share cat videos or buy books online, and certainly wasn't created overnight? No, the internet began as a military experiment, born not out of curiosity, but out of fear. Fear of nuclear war, of losing command and control in a fractured world. And yet today, it connects nearly 5 billion people across the globe, governs our economy, influences our politics, and reshapes human relationships every second. This is not the story of billion-dollar IPOs or flashy tech founders. This is the forgotten story, the one buried in Cold War bunkers, whispered through telephone wires, and coded into the pulses of early computers. Before there was Google, before Facebook, before Wi-Fi or smartphones, there were long nights, clunky machines, and brilliant minds working quietly in the background, trying to solve one impossible problem. How do you keep communication alive, even if cities fall and satellites fail? The birth of the internet wasn't just an invention, it was a transformation, an evolution of how human beings think, share, and exist. But its origins are rarely told with the depth they deserve. Because behind every ping, every message, every download, there is a story of global tension, hidden laboratories, and unexpected genius. In this deep dive, we'll travel from the chalkboards of visionary theorists to the corridors of the Pentagon, from forgotten labs in the 1960s to the digital explosion of the 1990s. You'll meet the engineers, the dreamers, the skeptics, and the unsung heroes who built the skeleton of our digital world, brick by digital brick. This is how the internet was truly born, not with a click, but with a code, a signal, a war, and a dream. Let's begin. Long before the internet had a name, before cables were laid beneath oceans and satellites orbited overhead, humanity faced a simple, ancient problem: how to communicate across distance, quickly, reliably, and without losing the message in transit. For millennia, the tools were primitive: smoke signals, carrier pigeons, semaphore flags. Then came the printing press, the telegraph, and the telephone, each a revolution in its own right. But all of them had a common limitation: they were point to point. A letter traveled from sender to receiver. A call connected one phone to another. If that line was cut, the message died. By the mid-20th century, that limitation had become a growing concern. The world was changing fast. Tensions between global superpowers were escalating, and the specter of nuclear war hung heavy in the air. In the United States, military strategists began asking a terrifying question: what if a nuclear strike wiped out Central Command? How would surviving units communicate? How would anyone coordinate a response? The solution, they realized, couldn't rely on a central hub. It needed to be decentralized, a network where information could reroute itself, adapt, survive, enter the earliest conceptual seeds of the internet. As far back as the 1930s and 40s, pioneering minds like Vannevar Bush were dreaming of machines that could store, retrieve, and link human knowledge. His 1945 essay, As We May Think, imagined the Memex, a personal data archive that foreshadowed the modern hyperlink. Though never built, it captured the imagination of post-war technologists. Then, in 1958, the US government launched ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, in direct response to the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik. ARPA's mission was to prevent future technological surprises, to look far ahead, to take risks. And it would soon become the incubator for a bold idea, a computer network that could survive anything. Meanwhile, across university campuses, computer scientists were growing restless. The machines they used were enormous, expensive, and isolated. If one lab needed to share code with another, it had to be printed, boxed, and mailed, sometimes across the country. These inefficiencies sparked a dream among early programmers. What if machines could talk directly to each other? One of the key thinkers to take this dream seriously was J.C.R. Licklider, a psychologist turned computer theorist. In the early 1960s, he published a paper outlining the idea of an intergalactic computer network, a system where information could be shared freely across time and space, where man and machine would collaborate in real time. It sounded like science fiction, but to ARPA, it sounded like a future worth funding. Still, the path forward was anything but clear. The underlying technologies didn't exist yet. There were no agreed-upon standards, no protocols, no blueprint. The computers of the time couldn't even agree on how to speak to one another. Each used its own language, wiring, and logic. Connecting them would be like making a dozen alien civilizations suddenly understand one another overnight. But the seeds had been planted. The military had a need. The scientists had a vision. And for the first time in history, resources were being funneled into turning that vision into reality. It was the dawn of something massive, the quiet before the digital storm, a time when communication was still limited, but minds were beginning to connect, laying the philosophical and technical foundation for a network that would one day reshape the world. The genesis was underway. The year was 1966. The Cold War raged on, and inside the halls of the US Department of Defense, a new kind of war was being imagined. Not one of bombs and bullets, but of data, disruption, and control. Into this scene stepped a man named Larry Roberts, a brilliant engineer with a quiet determination. Recruited by ARPA, he was tasked with leading what would become one of the most ambitious communication projects in human history. His mission, to make computers talk to one another, across universities, across states, and eventually across continents. A concept known as packet switching would be his weapon of choice. Packet switching was revolutionary. Traditional phone networks relied on circuit switching, a single, unbroken line between sender and receiver. But what if, instead of one fragile line, messages were broken into tiny digital packets that traveled separately through different routes and reassembled at their destination? It was a radical departure, one that would make networks faster, more resilient, and far more efficient. But it wasn't Roberts who first came up with the idea. That credit goes to Paul Baran, a researcher at the Rand Corporation. Baran had proposed packet switching back in the early 1960s as a way to create a survivable communication network in the event of a nuclear strike. At the same time, across the Atlantic, British computer scientist Donald Davies was developing similar ideas at the National Physical Laboratory. Though separated by geography and circumstance, both men had touched on a principle that would become the heart of the internet. By the late 1960s, Roberts took these ideas and turned them into blueprints. He envisioned a network that could connect four major research institutions: UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. To link these campuses, a small but powerful device would be needed, the IMP, or Interface Message Processor, essentially the Internet's first router. These refrigerator-sized boxes would translate each university's unique computer system into a common language, allowing them to exchange packets. The first test was set for October 29, 1969. At UCLA, computer scientist Leonard Kleinrock and his team were ready. They typed a simple command into their terminal: login. The system crashed after just 2 letters, but it was enough. L and O, the first 2 characters ever sent over what would become the internet. The experiment continued. Bugs were fixed, lines were stabilized, and by the end of that year, all 4 universities were linked. The network was called ARPANET, and it was working. But not everyone saw the significance. At the time, ARPANET was still an experiment, limited to academic and military circles. Its potential to become a global communication system was not yet obvious. Many institutions resisted joining. Some mocked the idea of computers replacing letters and phone calls. And the technology itself was still clunky, expensive and slow. Yet quietly, the groundwork was being laid for something far greater. The 1970s brought new thinkers into the fold. Two names would soon reshape everything: Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn. These two computer scientists realized that as more networks began to form around the world, there needed to be a universal set of rules to connect them. A network of networks. In 1974, they proposed the TCP/IP protocol, a standardized language that allowed computers to find each other, talk to each other, and transmit data without needing to understand the specifics of each other's system. By January 1st, 1983, ARPANET officially adopted TCP/IP, and from that day forward, the modern Internet was born. There were still challenges. Firewalls needed to be built, email systems refined, domain names created. But the fundamental breakthrough had occurred. For the first time, global data transmission didn't require a single central authority. It was distributed, decentralized, and unstoppable. The spark had been lit. The prototype had proven its power. The world hadn't changed yet, but it would. Soon this humble, military-backed network would escape the lab, infiltrate homes, reshape industries, and redefine civilization itself. When the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 1983, the world quietly crossed a threshold. ARPANET, the experimental military network that had connected a handful of academic institutions, officially adopted TCP/IP, a universal protocol that allowed computers across the globe to speak the same language. With that one shift, the Internet as we know it was born, not yet the vast digital ocean of today, but a skeletal framework humming to life beneath the surface of public awareness. The ascent of the Internet from that point was not explosive, but methodical, a slow burn of innovation, adoption, reinvention, and cultural upheaval. This is the story of that climb. In the early 1980s, the Internet was still a secret whispered among researchers and defense contractors. It lived in data centers and government labs, confined to elite universities and scientific minds. But something was stirring. The first milestone came in 1984 with the introduction of the Domain Name System, DNS, a crucial invention that replaced numeric IP addresses with easily recognizable names like .com, .edu, and .gov. It was a deceptively simple change, but one that would lay the groundwork for mainstream usability. Now, humans could remember and navigate the Internet without needing to memorize strings of numbers. It was like giving street names to a city that had only GPS coordinates. In the same year, Cisco Systems was founded, a company that would later dominate the world of networking hardware, producing the routers and switches that quietly power our modern lives. Meanwhile, in Europe, computer scientists were developing EUNet, a network that would connect academic institutions across the continent and lay the foundation for Europe's early Internet backbone. In 1985, the US National Science Foundation launched NSFNet, a high-speed backbone connecting supercomputing centers across the country. NSFNet would eventually take over ARPANET's role as the central highway of Internet traffic. By removing access restrictions, it opened the doors for thousands of academic institutions and independent networks to connect. The Internet was evolving from an elite experiment into a growing web of connected minds. In these years, the concept of email exploded. Though first invented in the early 1970s by Ray Tomlinson, it was now becoming the killer app. A faster, cheaper alternative to paper mail or telephone communication among professionals. By the end of the decade, millions of emails were being exchanged every day. As the 1990s dawned, the pieces were all in place. Networking protocols, domain names, international connectivity. What was missing was a public interface, a way for ordinary people to explore the internet without needing a computer science degree. Enter Tim Berners-Lee, a British computer scientist working at CERN. In 1991, he released the World Wide Web, a system that combined hypertext with internet protocols to create interlinked documents viewable in a web browser. It was revolutionary. Unlike older text-based systems, the web offered a visual experience, pages that could contain images, text, and links, all navigable with a mouse click. At first, the web was confined to academics, but in 1993, the release of Mosaic, the first graphical web browser, changed everything. Developed by a team at the University of Illinois, Mosaic made the web accessible, not just usable, but intuitive. You didn't need to understand code to explore anymore. That same year, the internet had just over 600 websites. 1 year later, it had over 10,000. The growth was exponential and irreversible. The commercialization of the internet began. In 1994, Netscape Communications was founded by Mark Andreessen, and its browser, Netscape Navigator, became the dominant portal to the web. Yahoo launched as a human-curated index of websites. In 1995, Amazon.com opened its virtual doors, followed by eBay, GeoCities, and thousands of others. In 1996, Microsoft entered the browser wars with Internet Explorer, embedding it in Windows and triggering years of antitrust battles. But the real story was the shift. The internet was becoming a public utility. Meanwhile, internet service providers, ISPs, like AOL, CompuServe, and Earthlink brought millions online through dial-up. That screeching modem sound became a soundtrack to an entire generation's awakening to the digital world. Between 1997 and 2000, the internet transformed into a new kind of gold rush, the dot-com boom. Startups exploded. Venture capital flooded into tech. Seemingly overnight, companies with nothing more than a domain name and a press release were valued in the billions. Pets.com, Webvan, eToys, household names for a moment. Yet amid the excess, giants emerged. In 1998, two Stanford students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, launched Google, a search engine powered by an innovative PageRank algorithm that delivered shockingly relevant results. While others were focused on splashy portals, Google focused on utility, speed, and accuracy. It would quietly begin its rise to dominance. That same year, PayPal launched, enabling online payments and laying the foundation for the e-commerce explosion. The first blogs appeared. Early adopters began to share thoughts, build online communities, and create content. By 2000, the internet had become part of the cultural fabric. News, music, dating, gaming, everything had a digital component. But the bubble burst. Poorly managed startups collapsed. Billions in investment evaporated. The crash was painful, but it cleared the way for sustainable growth. The collapse of the dot-com bubble didn't end the internet's rise. It redefined it. In the early 2000s, broadband began to replace dial-up. Internet speeds increased dramatically. Pages loaded in seconds instead of minutes. Wi-Fi became common in homes and cafes. The internet was no longer a luxury, it was a given. This enabled the birth of Web 2.0, a term used to describe the shift from static web pages to interactive platforms. Users were no longer just consumers, they were creators. Friendster arrived in 2002, followed by MySpace in 2003. Then, in 2004, a Harvard student named Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook. Originally for college students, Facebook soon expanded, globally, changing the nature of online identity and social interaction. In 2005, YouTube emerged, allowing anyone to upload and share video content. In 2006, Twitter introduced real-time microblogging, 140 characters at a time. Meanwhile, Apple's iPhone launched in 2007, combining a phone, camera, and full internet browser in one device. It was the beginning of the mobile internet and the dawn of the app era. By the end of the 2000s, the internet wasn't just something you accessed, it was something you carried with you everywhere. As the 2010s began, the internet entered a new phase, dominated by platforms, powered by data, and driven by user behavior. Cloud computing took center stage. Companies like Amazon Web Services, AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure allowed businesses to run on rented digital infrastructure. Files, services, and software moved from hard drives to remote servers, always available anywhere on any device. Streaming replaced traditional media. Spotify, Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus turned entertainment into a subscription service. Instagram and Snapchat created a new visual language. TikTok exploded near the decade's end, reimagining video in 15-second bursts. The platform giants, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, became more than tech companies. They became global forces, shaping economies, politics, and even public health policy. But the decade also revealed cracks. Privacy scandals erupted. The Cambridge Analytica revelations in 2018 showed how personal data could be harvested and weaponized. For political gain, Edward Snowden in 2013 exposed mass surveillance by the NSA. Even so, connectivity grew. By 2020, more than 4.5 billion people, over half the world's population, were online. Then, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The world locked down, and the internet became humanity's lifeline. Schools went virtual. Remote work became standard. Telehealth, digital payments, and online collaboration tools exploded in usage. The internet wasn't just a convenience anymore, it was survival. From ARPANET's 4 nodes to billions of interconnected devices. From Mosaic to Chrome. From a military contingency plan to the central nervous system of the modern world. Each milestone, the development of DNS, the release of Mosaic, the rise of Google, the launch of the iPhone, the growth of the cloud. Built upon the last, layering functionality over infrastructure, culture over code. The ascent wasn't linear, it was chaotic, driven by innovation, slowed by fear, sped up by crisis, reshaped by profit. But at every turn, it brought us closer to something extraordinary, a shared digital consciousness, one that now defines how we live, think, connect, and dream. The internet didn't just change technology, it changed civilization. By the early 2000s, something remarkable had happened. The internet was no longer a space reserved for scientists, engineers, and academics. It had slipped quietly into living rooms, classrooms, and office cubicles. Then, all at once, it exploded. Mainstream adoption didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with emails from relatives, photo albums shared online, and "You've Got Mail" chimes echoing across homes. It was DSL and cable broadband, cheaper than ever. It was Wi-Fi in coffee shops, allowing people to carry the web with them as casually as a notebook. The cultural shift was gradual but undeniable. The internet had crossed the threshold from a technological utility to a social necessity. The mid-2000s saw the birth of platforms that changed daily life. Facebook wasn't just a new way to connect with friends. It redefined what friendship meant in the digital age. YouTube turned passive consumers into creators. People didn't just watch the internet, they participated in it. The term viral entered the cultural vocabulary, not to describe disease, but to define how fast an idea could spread when given the right format and the right platform. Businesses transformed overnight. Brick-and-mortar stores built websites. Classified ads gave way to Craigslist and eBay. Travel agencies were replaced by Booking.com and TripAdvisor. Even dating, once considered deeply personal and private, moved online, reshaped by algorithms. And swipeable profiles, governments and institutions took notice. The internet was no longer a hobby or an afterthought. It was an instrument of policy, power, and persuasion. Campaigns were waged online. Movements found momentum in hashtags. Voices long marginalized in traditional media found platforms and followers. But what truly solidified the internet's role in society was the smartphone. When Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007, it marked a new era. The internet was no longer something you accessed from a desk. It lived in your pocket, always on, always watching, always ready. Apps replaced websites. Notifications replaced schedules. Screens replaced silence. By 2010, more people accessed the internet from phones than from computers. Children learned to scroll before they could write. Families texted across rooms. The internet was no longer a space. It was the backdrop of daily life. It also became the infrastructure of industry. Logistics companies optimized routes through real-time data. Factories synced through cloud systems. Agriculture turned to sensors and satellite mapping. Healthcare leaned into telemedicine. Education opened to remote classrooms. The web was no longer optional. It was the operating system of modern civilization. At the same time, cultural values shifted. Instant access created new expectations for answers, for deliveries, for validation. Patience eroded, attention shortened. The speed of the internet had begun to reshape the human experience itself. This was the true revolution, not just that the internet was adopted, but that it became invisible. Like electricity or running water, it faded into the background of consciousness. You didn't marvel at it. You relied on it. A force once born in secrecy had become the most democratizing and disruptive invention of the modern age, and its evolution was far from over. By the dawn of the 2020s, the internet had reached a state few had predicted, not just widespread, but utterly embedded. It had evolved from a communication network into a vast, intelligent infrastructure that now touches nearly every facet of human life. But what happened after the revolution? What has the internet become in its mature, contemporary form? For one, it diversified. Today's internet is no longer a monolith. It is fragmented, multi-layered, and hyper-specialized. Social media is no longer just Facebook and Twitter. It includes TikTok, Discord, Mastodon, Reddit, Twitch, and an ever-growing list of platforms tailored for niche audiences. Each platform serves a different cultural function, from entertainment to activism, from education to disinformation. Cloud computing now powers most of the modern digital economy. Companies no longer maintain massive on-site servers. Instead, they rent scalable resources from Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, paying only for what they use. Startups can now launch apps, platforms, and entire services without ever owning physical hardware. The barrier to innovation has dropped, and the pace of change has accelerated. In parallel, AI and machine learning have fundamentally altered how the internet operates. Algorithms don't just organize data, they anticipate behavior. Recommendation systems on YouTube, Netflix, and Amazon guide what we watch, buy, and believe. These invisible architectures shape opinion and behavior in real time, often without the user's awareness. Meanwhile, the Internet of Things, IoT, connects billions of physical devices, from smart thermostats and refrigerators to pacemakers. In factory machines, your home now talks to your phone, your watch talks to your doctor, your car updates itself overnight. The rise of 5G and satellite internet championed by companies like SpaceX's Starlink, is pushing high-speed connectivity into rural and underserved regions, potentially bringing the last billion people online. At the same time, blockchain and cryptocurrencies have attempted to create a decentralized internet, a counterforce to centralized corporate control. But with this expansion has come complexity. Cybersecurity is now a frontline issue. Hacks, leaks, and ransomware attacks have crippled hospitals, pipelines, corporations, and governments. The sheer volume of sensitive data online, medical, financial, biometric, has made the internet a battlefield for control and protection. Ethical debates have intensified. Social media's role in mental health, the addictive nature of algorithmic content, the erosion of privacy, the manipulation of truth, all have sparked global concern. The lines between public and private, true and false, local and global have blurred, and yet the internet remains indispensable. In the last few years alone, it has enabled remote work at scale, virtual schooling, telehealth, and online vaccinations, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. It connects over 5.4 billion people today, making it the largest human-made system in history. What began as a Cold War contingency plan is now a living, evolving entity, resilient, restless, and deeply intertwined with the human experience. Its current state is not a final form, but a reflection of our present, and like all tools, its impact will continue to depend on how we choose to use it. It's difficult to imagine the world before the internet, and nearly impossible to picture a future without it. In just a few decades, this invisible web of code and cables has restructured the architecture of modern civilization. Before the internet, communication was slow and limited by geography. Now a child in Nairobi can video call a grandparent in Toronto. A researcher in Argentina can collaborate instantly with a colleague in Sweden. A business in Jakarta can sell handmade jewelry to a buyer in Berlin without ever meeting. The barriers of time, language, and distance have not just softened, they have in many cases dissolved. Education has expanded beyond the walls of the classroom. Platforms like Khan Academy, Coursera, and YouTube have democratized learning. Entire degrees can now be earned from a laptop. Knowledge, once hoarded in ivory towers, is now freely, though not always equally, available to anyone with a connection. Commerce has undergone a transformation, from the rise of e-commerce giants to the survival of small businesses through digital storefronts. The internet has changed not only how we buy, but what we value. Convenience, customization, and speed have become the hallmarks of the new economy. Culturally, the internet has become a mirror. It reflects our hopes and fears, our humor and anger, our creativity and our cruelty. It has given rise to global movements for justice, new forms of art and storytelling, and even digital identities that transcend borders and bodies. But perhaps its greatest legacy is this: it taught humanity how to think collectively. The internet is the first invention that allows billions of people to participate in a single real-time conversation. A chaotic, beautiful, and often dangerous experiment in global consciousness. From Wikipedia to crowdsourced science, from open-source software to global protests coordinated through a hashtag, the internet has redefined collaboration, and it has inspired other revolutions. Smartphones, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, streaming media, social networks. Each of these innovations owes its existence to the infrastructure and philosophy of the internet, a world where decentralization, openness, and relentless iteration became the norm. The story of the internet is not just about technology. It's about humanity. It's about how a few visionaries driven by curiosity, fear, and hope created a system that redefined what it means to be connected. This is the legacy of the internet. Not just lines of code, but a changed world and a connected species. So where do we go from here? If the last 50 years have shown us anything, it's that the internet doesn't stand still. It morphs, it adapts, it anticipates the next frontier before most of us even know we're approaching it. Today, the conversation revolves around Web3, the idea of a decentralized internet built on blockchain technology where users own their data, creators control their content, and platforms no longer act as gatekeepers. It's an ambitious vision, and while still nascent, it reflects a growing desire to take back control from corporate monopolies and reshape how we interact online. Then there's the metaverse, a persistent shared digital world blending augmented reality, virtual reality, and social presence. Companies like Meta, Apple, and Microsoft are investing billions in building immersive experiences where work, play, and life itself may unfold within 3D digital spaces. Whether this vision becomes mainstream or remains niche is still unknown. But the groundwork is being laid. Artificial intelligence is now woven into the fabric of the internet itself. From personalized search results to generative AI tools that write, draw, and compose, the future of the web may not be human-made, but human-guided, with machines co-authoring our collective experience. Meanwhile, satellite-based internet networks such as Starlink promise to bring high-speed access to the most remote corners of the globe, bridging the final digital divide. And with quantum computing on the horizon, even the very foundations of encryption and data security could be rewritten. But with these possibilities come questions. Will we build an internet that empowers, or one that manipulates? Will privacy become a right again, or a relic of the past? Will this new digital era bring us closer, or deepen the divisions we already face? The answers aren't written yet, because the internet, in its essence, has always been a mirror, reflecting not just our technology, but our values, and the next chapter, that's up to us. From secret Cold War labs to the palm of your hand, the internet's journey has been anything but ordinary. What began as a fragile network of 4 computers has become a living system, one that fuels economies, builds communities, shares knowledge, and stores our collective memory. It didn't emerge overnight. It was built, idea by idea, wire by wire, packet by packet, by dreamers, tinkerers, and thinkers who saw beyond their time. Its legacy isn't just technical, it's human. It has changed how we live, how we learn, how we connect, and who we become. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the hidden history of the internet. If this story opened your eyes or sparked new questions, please like the video, share it with someone curious, and leave us a comment with your thoughts. And for more deep dives into the unseen layers of history and innovation, subscribe to our channel. The next story is just a click away.